So yeah, your book. I'm only about 100 pages into it at this point, but I love it, man. I love that you're weaving in esoteric knowledge and kind of bigger concepts than just the surface narrative. Um, I'm super curious. I write as well, but I've never written fiction, and I'm just super curious about your the process. Because I've thought like it would be cool to write fiction, but I look at these stories. I'm like, how the heck does somebody come up with one of these stories? The detail, and I get that you worked in a newsroom, and so it's easy for you to kind of just take that context and put it into the story. But I'm curious, do you know the whole arc of the story before you start writing, or is it kind of just you have a thought and you want to pull it out and you start working on it?
Yeah, great questions. I actually really enjoy the process of writing fiction more so than I do non-fiction, I think, because I'm writing the follow-up to that book at the moment. That one is called The Cause and the Cure. It's set in the early 90s, 1990 and 1991. It's got an epilogue set in 1996. And the book I'm writing at the moment catches up with the characters 5 years on from that epilogue in 2001. So it's many of the same characters, but it's like a decade later. And it's set against the backdrop of the events of September 11th. That forms the basis of the new story. I call these books truth fiction. I think there should be a new genre because they are ostensibly fiction, albeit cloaked in allegory and metaphor, which is what I've tried to do with these. But there's a whole load of truth in there as well. And they do actually offer a great opportunity to convey empowering truths to people. There's a lot you can get away with when you present it as fiction, which you can't when you present it as factual. If you make some bold, wild claim in a non-fiction book, the first thing people are going to ask for is the citation or the reference for where you got that information from. And that's not a problem for me. In my non-fiction books, I do provide all the citations at the end of the chapters. But the great thing about fiction is that you can make a bold, wild claim and just leave it at that. And if somebody comes back to you and says, that's outrageous, what you said in that book, you can say, chill out, man. Just be cool. It's fiction. Come on.
Yeah.
Why are you getting so upset? It's just fiction. It's not just fiction, but that's your way out of it.
Right.
And I think that's why I enjoy this writing process so much. So, with the book that I'm writing at the moment, I'm just over halfway through the plot. And I did map out pretty precisely where I wanted the narrative to go. So, I did have a pretty clear idea in my mind. I'm just trying to think what the inspiration was for the first book, because I wrote that in 2019. I just had this idea that I wanted to try my hand at fiction because I'd never written a fiction book before. And I saw it as a sort of cathartic break from the dense, heavy material that I dealt with in my musical truth books. So I set myself the challenge of putting this story together. And they say that you should write about what you know. So that's why I set it in the 90s, because I've got great, fond, nostalgic memories of the 90s. I had an absolute blast in the 90s. I just loved the entire decade. And also, I've set it in Oxford, which is my city of birth, or my born city, let's say, at least. And so many of the locations that appear in these stories are very real locations, and they're based on my memories of them in the early 90s. So that part was quite easy. And also, I've put a lot of myself into some of these characters. So I've taken aspects of my personality and some of my mannerisms and a lot of my memories and my experiences and given them to some of these characters. So many of them are a sort of hodgepodge of different sort of influences. The main character in each of these stories is a black female who I've given the name Verity Hunter, because the name translates literally as truth seeker. Verity from the Latin word veritas, meaning truth, and hunter, of course, is a seeker. So literally, she's somebody who's seeking after the truth. And all the names are coded. So every character, their name means something. They're not just randomly named. And the reason I selected a black female as the main character is because I'm a white male. And it would have been very easy for me to have had my main character as a white male. There are white males in the story. This is not me being woke either, by the way. It's me setting myself the literary challenge of trying to imagine what it would be like to be a black female, because I don't know what that's like, not in this lifetime anyway. So I've really had to stretch myself in terms of my imagination and creativity to write the story from the perspective of this main character. So that was one of the challenges I set myself. And also, I wanted these stories to be layered. So I wanted the reader to be able to strip away the surface narrative and find all kinds of meaning underneath, and the odd allegory, the odd metaphor, some symbolism, some coding stuff that you can have some fun decoding. And my main inspiration for that was the movies of Stanley Kubrick,
Hmm.
actually, because I'm full of admiration for how much Kubrick was able to get into his films, particularly The Shining, which is probably the most coded movie that he put out. You can strip away so many layers of that film, and you just wonder how it was possible for Stanley, when preparing that script, that variation on the Stephen King story, to get so much in there. And I wanted to try and repeat that process in my books. I've written them, I feel, from a very cinematic point of view. So, with all the scenes, I've imagined how they would look if they were made into a TV show or a film. And I've thought about things like camera angles and the way characters would move around a room and this sort of thing. And I would love to see these stories made one day into a TV show or movie. I don't imagine it would ever happen, but they are very cinematic novels, I feel. Even down to the fact that with The Cause and the Cure, I've got a soundtrack. It's probably the only novel in the world that comes with its own soundtrack. So, being a DJ, I had a fun experience putting together the soundtrack for that story. And it consists of music of the time. So, in the case of The Cause and the Cure, it's music from the early 90s, stuff that was around in that era, interspersed with little news clips and bits of audio from the time. And I'm doing the same thing with this 2001 follow up, although the music wasn't as interesting in 2001 as it was in 1990. So that's a very long-winded answer to your question, brother. But I'm really enjoying this creative process. I'm really glad that I set myself the challenge of doing it. And I'm actually going to be sorry when this book is written, because I'm enjoying it so much.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I resonate with what you're saying related to having the soundtrack be part of the experience. With my writing process, I love reading, but I don't presume that most people today like to read books. They prefer these short snippets of information. Our by
Right.
design, as you know, our attention span has been shortened and shortened and shortened. But so I intersperse, chunks of what I want to say with memes that I find on the internet, or a movie clip that is appropriate for what I just said or what I'm about to say, to try to break it up a little bit.
So
Uh,
what do you write yourself?
I've got a website where I write about all kinds of different topics, but generally the title of the website is Discovering the Wetiko, or Wetiko, depending on the way that you pronounce it. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that concept, but it's a Native
I
American.
am, yeah. The
You
mind
are, okay, great.
virus. Yeah.
So yeah, Native American idea of the devil, essentially,
Right.
and it's based on my own discovering of the concept and the subsequent awakening process that began for me spiritually back in 2011. And it's mostly, actually, so far it's all nonfiction, but I feel this pull to bring fiction into it as a separate section of the website. But I talk about all kinds of different topics related to, the darkness in the world and the light in the world.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one thing about these novels is they've got some edgy, potentially dark sort of elements to them, because I'm getting across spiritual teachings, natural law principles, this sort of thing. That's all encoded into the story as well, as you'll find when you progress with this one. So, on the surface of it, The Cause and the Cure is a murder mystery thriller. So it's sort of in the vein of Inspector Morse and that sort of thing, which was also set in the city of Oxford. But when you strip away those layers of the surface narrative, you'll find all these other elements there. And ultimately, it ends on an inspiring note. I hope that the reader will go away from the story having learnt some stuff, having reflected and thought about a thing or two, but it ends on an ultimately optimistic note. And that's the way I'm going to leave this second story as well, because there's enough doom and gloom in the world. There's enough stories full of murder and mayhem and chaos and violence without me needing to add to it. I don't know if you've noticed, but pretty much every successful Hollywood blockbuster movie is full of explosions and death and chaos and violence and all this sort of thing. Any futuristic movie always is dystopian, always portrays a futuristic society where some catastrophe has befallen it and it's had to recover from it. You never get a futuristic film which is utopian, which is full of love, where society is thriving and everyone is cooperating with each other and everything's great. You don't get that kind of thing. So the world doesn't need more stories of that nature. It needs more stories that are going to inspire people, are going to make them think, and are going to take them out of that low vibratory, dense, negative state, out of these lower frequencies that are bogging us down and causing all the problems in the world, and into a state of heightened consciousness. So that's something I'm trying to achieve through these stories as well, and I think is also an important part of the process.
I definitely appreciate that, and that's actually a great segue into the other thing I want to talk to you about. Before we go there, I wanted to tease out a little bit more about your creative process, if I could. I've got 40 plus drafts of things that I know I'm going to write about at some point, but I don't have yet what I call the author's voice. Each piece that I've written has a distinct author's voice that comes through me, and until I hear that kind of inspiration, I've got all, it's like I do all the research and I've got all the pieces, but I don't know how to put it all together yet, because there's a thread that weaves it all together. And once that comes to me, then I can sit down and start writing. And as I'm writing, I have a general idea of where I'm going with it. But I don't perceive myself as the one that's actually coming up with the idea. It's coming through me, as a lot of artists say. It's not, I'm the vessel, I'm the instrument.
Sure.
And it's spirit that's bringing this through. And that's a huge part of what I'm doing my best to bring forward with my writing, is just the awareness of that in and of itself. But as I'm writing, it's like I'm getting to have an entertainment experience for myself from the divine, because I don't really know where it's going. I put something down and then I'm like, oh, I need a meme here, and I go in and search just keywords for some meme, and what comes back is just, I'm laughing my ass off, falling on the ground laughing, because I didn't know that's perfect, and I didn't even know it existed, and then I put it in and I keep going. But it's the most fun I think I've ever had in my life, is when I get that inspiration. But it's so sporadic. And at first, early in my journey, it was very frustrating, because I hear about people like Stephen King, and Elizabeth Gilbert did a great TED talk talking about how she just sits down every day 8 to 4 and just writes and writes and writes, and she doesn't, she's just a stubborn mule doing her best. But it's up to the divine genius that comes and inspires when the real magic comes through. And so I'm curious about how that is for you. You mentioned you've got this outline, but as you're writing the story, how does that come through for you?
I write very quickly because I have to, because I'm just so damn busy. I've got
Mm.
so many things going on at any given time, podcasts and videos and live talks and stuff. And in the midst of all of that, I have to try and write these books. So I churned out that novel, The Cause and the Cure, between, I think it was March and late September 2019. So I got it written in a matter of like 6 months.
Wow.
And I'm probably going to get this one done in about 6 months as well. But these aren't huge doorstops like some of these novels. The average Dan Brown novel, is like a foot tall. So my books aren't anywhere close to that. So I don't have to sit there from 8 till 4 every day turning this stuff out. I snatch moments here and there. So it might be an hour here, 45 minutes there, an hour and a half here. I do it in airport lounges. I travel everywhere with my laptop. And I, occasionally just knock out 30 minutes worth of stuff if I'm waiting for a train or a plane or something. And I enjoy going out to the local pub and just sitting there in the corner, being an antisocial bastard that doesn't talk to anyone. I'm just sat there with my laptop and a beer to lubricate the process and write a little bit that way. So it's bits and bobs here and there. And in terms of having an outline of the story and an idea of where it's going to go, I definitely embark on the project with a very clear idea of what I want to achieve with it. So uh, I definitely know what the basic outline of the story is going to be. And then the fine detail gets filled in as I go, I find. And because I'm using real life locations in Oxford, I find great inspiration there. I don't live in Oxford anymore, so I have to travel there to see the locations. I was actually there yesterday taking a bunch of photographs because another thing I do with these novels is I have an intermission. That's another thing that makes them like old school films, where halfway through you get a break in the story. So there's Act One, an intermission, and Act Two. And in the intermission, I include photographs of the very real locations where aspects of the story take place. So I was taking a bunch of those yesterday.
Hmm.
So I can walk around Oxford and look at a particular location and think, wow, I know what scene would be really great if it was taking place here. That's given me an idea for an aspect of the story. I also have dialogue in mind. So, as I mentioned, I've got sort of natural law teachings and spiritual principles that I'm getting across. And sometimes the only real way to convey that is in the form of a conversation between a couple of the characters. So, in that case, I'll have one character sort of making some points and the other character responds to what they're saying. And between them, the way the conversation unfolds, it gets across the point that I wanted to make. So, pacing is important as well. There's got to be a bit of action from time to time to keep the reader engaged. So I tend to intersperse some of the more active stuff and some of the chapters where the characters are moving around and going from place to place with the conversation-based stuff, which is more static and stationary. So I just give some thought to all of that. So I've got 30 chapters in this book. And before I set out, I did flesh out or draft out an idea of what I wanted to happen in each of the 30 chapters.
Okay.
And that's kept me on track. It's
Mm.
kept me from straying too far. I'm giving thought to things like if a character's not been heard from for a while, like if you've gone 5 chapters without hearing about what this particular character is up to, it's probably time they cropped up again and did something. So that's a consideration that's going into it. And other than that, there's definitely a process where I'm channeling stuff, as you just mentioned there. It does feel as if we are conduits, we are outlets for some of this information, which seems to be downloaded through us from creation, from the divine, as you say. I find that happens a lot when I do live talks. So often I can go on stage when I'm giving a presentation, and I'll then come off a couple of hours later and watch back a recording of the presentation. And I'll be listening to the words that came through me. And I can't necessarily remember deciding to say those things. And sometimes I'll listen back and go, wow, that was pretty profound. Did I really say that? And it's definitely as if I've downloaded it from somewhere and it's come through me. I used to say a little, I guess you'd call it a prayer or a sort of affirmation statement before I would go on stage and do a live talk. And I would just express my intent to channel aspects of the divine, of the Most High, of the Creator, and allow empowering information to flow through me, allow truth to flow through me. And I would always make it clear that nothing else is being invited in, only the divine, the Creator, the Most High, nothing else, no other entities, no other, nothing. I just wanted to be a conduit for the one, the source. I've sort of fallen out of the habit of making those statements before I do live talks now, but for a period that was definitely working for me. And a funny thing occurred to me just this last weekend. I attended the Better Way conference in Bath in England, which is a great event. A few hundred people there of like minds. And we were all getting empowering information and figuring out ways that we can move forward and live better and attain higher consciousness and all this sort of stuff. And I heard somebody on stage make the comment, because we collectively in society let them, the occult controllers, the psychopaths, get away with 9/11 when we had the opportunity to wake up to what had really gone on with that event in 2001 and put down the system that was responsible for bringing it about. Because we didn't, and we let them get away with it, 19 years later, guess what? They pop back up like a game of smack-a-mole, and there they are bringing their convid scam to the world. And because we collectively as society, not those watching this video or those like us, but generally humanity allowed them to get away with the convid scam and all associated elements, they are now going to regroup and come back with their ultimate master plan, the New World Order, Agenda 2030, futuristic smart grid, 5G, Agenda 2030, Great Reset, and all of that, linked with climate change and all the rest of it. And when I heard this person make the comment, I thought, wow, that's pretty good. That's pretty profound. I like that. And somebody else then repeated the comment to me later in the conference. And I said to them, yeah, that's a great comment. Where did you hear that from? And he said, well, I got it from you. And I was like, yeah, I thought those words sounded familiar. So the person on stage had heard somebody else mention that they'd heard me say it. And then somebody else had repeated the comment from this person on stage, and it had found its way back to me. And I didn't realize at the time that I had actually said those words.
That's awesome.
And it's like that when I can watch back some of these recordings or listen back to a podcast like this, and I hear myself speak and express some things, and I think, yeah, that's pretty good, but I don't remember where it came from. It just like the words just came out of my mouth. And many other researchers have spoken of this process as well. You know, a lot of those that are involved in the same sort of work as us have said those sort of things. Filmmakers say it, script writers say it, authors say it, musicians say it. It seems that if you're of a creative sort of mind, you can often tap into that process and you can be bringing that information in from somewhere. What's important is to make sure that you're bringing it in from the right place. Because how many musicians have we heard speak of having channeled something or some entity or something that they don't really know what it is? If you don't make it clear what your terms and conditions are when you open yourself up to be a conduit, you can be bringing in all kinds of unwanted parties. Let's just leave it at that for now.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The primary motivation for me to start this show is over the years, I sit down with somebody one-on-one, and 3 hours later, it's like no time has gone by, and I can't remember half of what I've said, but I know during the course of the conversation that this is such amazing information that we're sharing between us, and it's often both of us are feeling as if we're drunk or we're high or something. And I think of that as, we're being inspired, we're being lifted up frequency wise because of this amazing exchange we're having. And I'd often think, God, I wish I was recording this. I would love to share this with other people. This is such amazing, not just the information that's being conveyed, but the flow between the two people is so beautiful. And you can just see the excitement and the inspiration because of something one person says, and then the other person gets inspired, and then they jump on, and it just keeps going up and up and up and up, and it's an amazing thing. And I want to do my best to capture that, just like we're doing right now between two people in a recording, instead of it just being something that only two people get to experience,
Yeah,
so,
it's a great thing to do. I've had so many one-on-one conversations just like that, whether it's over a coffee or over a beer or in somebody's house. And you really wish that you could have recorded it, because some very profound stuff gets spoken. It's just unfortunate that it goes nowhere in those sort of conditions. So that's why it's so valuable to do podcasts such as this, and to just make them conversations.
Yeah.
I don't really like to refer to my podcast, whether I'm the host or whether I'm being spoken to by the host, as interviews. It's far better just to treat them as chats, as conversations, and it's just a free flow, free exchange of information between the host and between the guest. You always get the best results when it's informal, like that, informal, unstructured, and just free flowing.
Absolutely. That's why my show is called Conversations with ... It's just a conversation. I'm not talking to an audience. I'm not introducing anybody. It's just as if you walked into the room and here's a conversation happening and you're joining in. And I think that's nothing against shows that are podcasts. I don't even really like to call my thing that I'm doing a podcast for that reason.
You know
So
what I really hate? I really hate it when I'm invited onto radio shows which are live. I'm not really a fan of doing anything live. I don't really like doing live radio shows. I used to like doing it back in the day when I was a DJ. I love the buzz of doing live radio when you're playing music. But when it comes to conversations and information and speech, I'm not a fan of doing anything live. I don't do live streams because so much can go wrong. It really pisses me off, actually, the amount of live streams that I watch where there's technical difficulties and the host is saying, "Oh, bear with me. Oh, I just got to
right.
fix this. Oh, damn. I'm just going to reboot my computer. Just hold on, stay there. Just going to plug this in." The audience really doesn't want to hear that. So
Yeah.
why not just record it? And if you get technical difficulties, you edit them out and then you present the audience with the finished product, which is just exactly what they want to hear. None of this technical stuff going on.
Yeah.
But I don't like going on radio shows where they've got ads and news breaks and things like that because it
Yeah.
really breaks up the conversation. American radio is a lot like that. Many
Yeah.
American stations, I've been on a few where you get to speak for maybe 7 or 8 minutes, and then the host is like, "Okay, we're here with Mark Devlin. He's talking about this, that, and the other. Hold on, we'll be right back after these
Right.
words." Then they play 5 minutes worth of commercials. And then you come back and you have to try and remember what you just said, get back into that zone, get back into that frame of mind. And it just sounds very stilted and very unnatural and very broken. So I'm not a fan of that at all. It's just far better to pre-record and keep it free flowing.
100% agree, brother. 100%. A couple questions about the book. And maybe you can just tell me if I'm going to find this out later. You don't have to answer the question, but Verity's connection with 216, I'm noticing. Can you tell me more about that? Or is that something I'm going to figure out later? Because I feel like I've seen 216 somewhere, but I can't remember where I've seen it. And so I'm wondering why 216 is coming up for her
Okay.
so much.
Well, it's great that you picked that out. One of the things I find most fascinating when I speak to readers of the novel is what aspects they've come across, what things have stood out for them, because it differs from person to person.
Yeah.
So somebody might have spotted a name, which is an anagram, and they'll say, "Oh, I've worked out what that anagram is." And then somebody else will notice, like you just said, some numbers. And somebody else will notice something that happens in a scene and they'll think that there's some importance to it. So I love getting that feedback from people. It's fascinating to me. I do actually have a document called The Cause and the Cure Decoded.
Oh, sweet.
And I offer to send this out to anyone that's bought the book. It's a PDF and it's the entirety of the story, but in red print throughout. I've explained what certain aspects of the story mean and what the inspiration is and what the allegory was that I was trying to get across, or what the message was that's being communicated through that particular passage. So I'm happy to send that out to anyone that does have a copy, and I'll send you one as well, now that you've just mentioned that. But yeah, 216 is important. It's Verity's birth date. I don't know if you've got to the bit where that becomes clear.
I think so.
But I've given her the birth date of the 21st of June, which is 21/6. So it's the summer solstice in what's referred to as the Northern Hemisphere. And the reason she sees 216s everywhere is because it's a reflection of a process that keeps happening to me. I see expressions of my birth date everywhere all the time. So my birth date, or born date, I'm trying to entrain myself not to use the word birth because of all the sort of maritime admiralty law connotations of it.
I love
But
that.
my birthday, my born date is the 12th of May. So that's 12th of the 5th. It's 1205. And I keep seeing that everywhere. So it's like every time I look at the clock, it's 1205. Every time I look at anything, a receipt, an amount that I've paid, it's like 125. Look at a DVD counter. I look at how many miles I've driven in my car. It's always 125 or 1250, 1205. So I decided to have my central character in the story experience her birthday everywhere. So she goes out shopping and she looks at the receipt and she spent £21.60. And the reason 216 is important is because it's part of an amazing cosmic sequence based around the number 9. So 2 plus 1 plus 6 equals 9. And every expression of this sequence always totals back to 9. 9's a very fascinating number because it's akin to 0. Because when you add it to anything and then you reduce the number back down, you always end up with the number with which you started. So 9 adds nothing effectively. It's like a 0. It's the only number that works with. And this amazing sequence starts with 3 times 9, 27. So 2 plus 7 is 9, obviously. And the reason that's important to my work is because there's this concept of the 27 Club, which is this large number of prominent musicians who've turned up dead in some suspicious circumstance or other at the age of 27. Then when you double that, you get 54. You double that again, you get 108. Now we're starting to get into some interesting measurements and dimensions which are given for the so-called planets and the sun and the moon. And when you double 108, you get 216. It's often claimed that the moon is 216,000 miles away from Earth. It's not. I don't buy that at all. But it's just interesting to me that the official cosmology, which is offered up to us, consists of all these numbers. So you've got the 216 going on there. You double that, you get to 432. I'll come back to that. 432 double becomes 864. You're getting into measurements that are given for the diameter of the sun. They always sum back to 9 when you add up all the figures. Going back to 432, which is twice 216, 432 hertz is said to be the harmonic frequency to which musical instruments should be pitched and at which we should all be listening to recorded music. This is a big part of my work as well. People seem really fascinated with these tuning pitch frequencies. So the story is that the standard tuning pitch for musical instruments always used to be 432 hertz. And this was changed around the end of the Second World War by the Rockefeller Foundation, who'd earlier had a go at trying to change that standard tuning pitch in 1917, but it never really took hold. So they came back again in the late 1940s and changed it from 432 hertz to 440. And so these same scientists of sound will tell you that 440 hertz is anything but a harmonic frequency. It's actually very harmful. When you listen to music that's pitched to that frequency, it puts you in a state of unease and discordance and makes you very agitated, and you don't realize it's going on because it's happening on an unseen level. So isn't it interesting that 432 comes through as harmonic, whereas 440 doesn't? 432 again is twice 216. 216, 21st of June, is the date of the summer solstice. And 216 is also 6 times 6 times 6. So lots of fun with numbers. You know, 666 is a number used by the dark occultists, the Satanists who currently run things in this world. It's not an inherently evil number in itself. No number is. Numbers, just like symbols, are neutral when they're in their base state. They're waiting to have meaning and intent imbued to them, according to the consciousness of the practitioner that's using these numbers or symbols. But 666 has been adopted as a sort of emblem of this sick, diseased control system. But it is interesting that 6 times 6 times 6 becomes 216. And so I just decided to give Verity, this character, that birth date and to have her experience these numbers everywhere. Because I think when we keep seeing the same numbers, different expressions of them, and when we have all these synchronicities, and maybe we have dreams, meaningful dreams, where information again is imparted to us, it's a bit like that process where we feel we're downloading information and it's channeling through us. Often I can wake up in the morning with the lyric to a song in my head for some reason. And as the day unfolds, it becomes clear what the meaning of that lyric is. And I might even go out later that day and walk into a bar or a cafe or a shop, and I hear that very song playing that I woke up in my mind with. And the lyrics seem to have some relevance to your experiences on that day. So that's something else that the characters go through, because like I say, I'm having them undergo many of the personal experiences that I have myself. So I love the fact that you've picked that out, because these numbers are very important to that story.
Thank you so much for that explanation, brother. I appreciate that. I resonated with it very strongly. The moon thing is where I think I've connected with the 216 from before, but I have the same thing going on in my experience with 74. I was born in 74. I see them everywhere. see them fours and sevens, sevens and fours on license plates, on billboards, on the clock, all the time. And I feel like it's kind of like an opportunity to come back into the present moment, like spirit saying, hey, you're come back right now, you know, like just be right here.
Yeah.
Also, I'm definitely familiar with the 432 thing. My guitars are tuned to 432. I have crystal sound bowls that are 432.
Oh, great.
It's very important to me too. So I love that.
Yeah. You struck me as a guy that would know all about that sort of stuff.
Appreciate that, brother. And just to kind of touch on one of the things you said earlier about the way you use conversation in your novel to get across information. I apologize. I'm going to butcher the name, but I think it was Phil that was the friend of Verity's boyfriend, or maybe Phil's the boyfriend. But the two guys were hanging out, and she comes home, and they're having this conversation, and then he chooses to share some information about the way that the occultists run the world. And I love not only that the way you presented that, but that you touched on something that I think is very important for my own journey that I've struggled with, but I'm getting better at. And that's knowing when to end the conversation, knowing when it's enough. You know, you're trying to overload somebody because you've got so much you want to share, and it's so exciting because I'm so passionate about it. But especially for someone who's not familiar with the information, you just got to give them just a little bit, and let it be like a seed that if it grows, they'll come back and want to ask more questions, you know? So I love that the way you, not only that you shared the information that you did in that scene, but the way that you emphasized he was like, okay, this is the natural end of the conversation, you know, let's leave it here.
Sure,
so,
sure.
Yeah,
that's important, knowing where to leave it, like you say. I've hit upon a great sort of literary device in this new story where the character Max Zeal, I think you probably encountered him by now in that first book.
Love that name.
Who may or may not be based on a couple of characters who've inspired me. We'll leave listeners to figure that one out. I actually used to work in the radio station, which is called Fox FM back in the day. I started working there in the newsroom in 1990. So you got Verity, who's the reporter working out of the newsroom, which I've called Lux FM in this story. But that's based on my real experiences. I've actually got a cameo in the book as well, like an Alfred Hitchcock style cameo where the young me appears in this story. I had a bit of fun with that. But you've got all this stuff happening in Lux FM. And that is based on real experiences that I had. And I'm just trying to remember where I was going with that. I just lost my train of thought for a minute. We were talking about conversations, right?
Yeah.
Sorry. No, I've got it back. There was a guy that I worked with in the radio station whose real name was Mark Zeal. That was actually his name, Zeall. So I've made the character in my story Max Zeal because zeal, of course, means passion, when you're deeply passionate about something and determined and tenacious. And max can be taken as to the max, maximum.
Yeah.
So this character is deeply passionate. That's why he's called Max Zeal. Okay. And in the second story, he's got a radio show on a pirate radio station being run out of a shed in somebody's back garden, which again is based on some real experiences that I had. And he's got a call-in show. And this is a great way of having conversations going. So you have callers and they say, hey, Max, I just wanted to bring this up, brother. And they start talking about something and Max, chips in with his own contributions. And then he says, hey, great call. Thanks for that. Okay, who else we got on the line? And then somebody else comes in and they raise a different point that they want to talk about. So I've got conversation going back and forth in the form of this radio call-in show, which I thought was a great way of getting some other points across. So there were certain things that I really wanted to convey. And so I deliberately concocted conversations between a couple of characters so that that conversation could take place and so that those points could get across. And there's more of that in the second story as well. And I'll just say to you that if you're at that point in this story, you have got a few surprises coming, and awesome. Hopefully they won't disappoint. Hopefully you'll find them quite thrilling.
So far, I'm loving it, man. I'm absolutely loving it. I guess I didn't really have the intention because it didn't come through, but I had the thought that I wanted to read the whole book before we talked, but I didn't actually start reading it until yesterday. So I only got about 100 pages in before I had to go to sleep. But
may I ask you, are you finding it to be cinematic in terms of, obviously when you read a novel, you formulate images in your mind of how you imagine a room to look or how you imagine a character to look. And I'm just wondering if, does it come across as if it's got a film-like quality to it, just from your
Definitely,
perspective?
definitely the way that you're doing you do a great job of painting the scene. And in my mind, I'm seeing the camera move from this person over to this person, as I'd have to go back to the specific words you used, but there's a scene where you're talking about somebody sitting on one side of the table, and then you bring it around to what the other person's doing at the other side, and so it does have that kind of, it definitely does have a cinematic feel to it, for sure.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool. In one of the early chapters, the reader's introduction to Verity is when she's been at her cousin Drew's house or flat. She's had a conversation with him. And then she gets into her Mini, which is a car that I used to have back in the day. So it's my car, which I've
Yeah.
given to her. And she's driving around the ring road of Oxford. And I've mentioned the road, she comes off this roundabout and goes onto this dual carriageway and then turns left here onto this trading estate. And the way I wrote that, I just imagined if it was filmed, you would have a helicopter giving it an aerial view of this Mini as it speeds along the roads and then makes its turn. And, the camera would follow it in that way. So, yeah, it's a beautiful thing to be able to put this into fiction writing. And it's so easy to do as well, because it's relatively easy to write a novel. If you're making a film, you can't do that as a solo effort. You need a team. You need cameramen or women. You need script writers. You need actors. You need a whole bunch of people, technical people. But you can write a book as a solo effort, and there's so much you can achieve and just pour into it of yourself. It becomes a very personal project and a very cathartic process as well. So I've got into the routine now of I write a non-fiction book, which is going to be, by its very nature, quite dense and heavy in terms of the material, just because of the stuff that I get into. And then I take a bit of a break from that by writing one of these novels and getting creative and, taking the story wherever I want it to go. And then after that, I'll get back down to the business of writing another non-fiction book. And I think that's probably going to be the pattern that I'll repeat now for the rest of my days, or for however much longer I'm able to write these books. So I sort of spend a year writing a book, or the best part of a year. I spend the next year touring it and promoting it and just taking a bit of a breather. And then the following year, it's on to the next book. So it's turning out to be quite a satisfying way of working there for me.
Love it, man. I love it. Yeah, I'm thinking of a scene where one of the cops is pulling up to the bar, the cult bar, and you described how he's flying, he's driving really fast, and then he pulls into the parking lot and inches away from the wall or something like that. Like that's
Right.
I can see that cinematic. I'm able to picture it in my mind the way, and then he's walking away from the car, and the parking meter guy, and he's flashing his badge, but he can't read it. Like all those things really help flesh out that scene so that I can see it in my mind.
Well,
So you did
thank you.
that very
Yeah.
well.
Well, I've clearly watched more films than I've read novels. So it's like the films that have stayed with me. The novel writer who I've admired the most, I would say, is Ian Fleming, creator
Okay.
of James Bond. I read all the James Bond novels when I was a young lad, and I found those stories absolutely thrilling. I was very much into James Bond when I was a kid. I've come to discover a thing or two since, of course, about how the James Bond stories have been used for mind control and pushing social engineering agendas and, behavioral modification entrainment and all this sort of thing. And Ian Fleming himself was an asset of British military intelligence. So, this is why I say you should really have no heroes. But those James Bond stories did influence my writing style, I would say, in some way. I think Fleming certainly knew how to write a very thrilling novel.
Right on. Well, and that brings us back to that segue I mentioned earlier, and I want to be mindful of your time. So if we can't get too deep into this topic, then like I said, maybe we can do it another time. But what you mentioned earlier about dystopian movies and how there's so many there doesn't seem to be a whole lot out there, if anything, of just utopian experiences where everything's happy. I think I imagine you're familiar with Joseph Campbell and the concept of the hero's journey.
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah, just the idea of, the in order to have a story unfold, the character has to go through an experience where they're taken from their comfortable world and thrust into an unknown realm, and they have to go through a series of initiatory experiences there, and then face some sort of challenge. A lot of people, or a lot of stories denote that as, you know, slaying the dragon, and then the result of that challenge and rising through that challenge is that they can then come home and they bring home what they learned on their journey and share it with the community, and that uplifts the entire community and then inspires people within the community to go on their own hero's journey. And
Isn't that just a metaphor for these lives? You know,
yeah,
when you have conversations with spiritually inclined people, many of them will say that on a soul level, we consent, we agree to come into these lives and to incarnate into these bodies. But obviously, we forget why we've come in. We have a memory wipe. And then we undergo that hero's journey where we have to undergo all these experiences and face adversity and face our fears and go through all sorts of challenges. And then at the end of it all, when we leave these bodies, we take back to source the lessons we've learned and the experiences we've had, and pool that knowledge with all the other knowledge and all the other experiences that every other soul that has ever lived has brought back. And so, you know, the one, the source, whatever you want to call it, God, is able to evolve and grow as a result of these experiences. So, what you've just outlined there, the hero's journey, I think it's an archetypal thing. It must be something that the reason these stories are so popular with people is because deep within us, as part of our very being, we've got these sort of ancestral memories of you know, where it is we've come from and what these lives are. It's not something that's consciously obvious, but there are elements of it embedded deep within our psyche. And I think these stories awaken those within us. People go on about Star Wars all the time. I've never been a Star Wars fan. I'm just like that rarest of guys. I'm just someone that never appreciated the Star Wars stories, but I know they're very, very loved. Uh, and also The Matrix. I was never really a fan of the Matrix movie, but people love that movie. And I think they both embody elements of this hero's journey archetype. And that's the reason why they've been so popular and so successful,
yeah,
I would say.
yeah, I agree. I agree. Lord of the Rings is another great example. Harry
Yeah,
Potter,
exactly.
even Wizard of Oz with Dorothy, you know, all of those stories. And that's actually what Campbell researched, all the ancient myths, all the fairy tales, you know, all the great novels from his time going backwards, and saw, and that's how he discovered this central theme, these three elements of separation, initiation, and return that's just present in pretty much every human story. And it wasn't until I learned about that, and that was 3 or 4 years into my awakening journey, that I really started to see a silver lining in all of this darkness. Because I think the reason why we don't have a lot of utopian stories is because it's just probably be kind of boring. There's nothing to get you fired up, you know, there's nothing to inspire. And
Well, yeah, this was one of the difficulties that I faced actually with uh, these two stories that I've written. I wanted them to be thrilling for the reader. I wanted them to be page turners. And as you say, if you have a story where everyone's happy and everything's fine and everything's peachy, then how thrilling can that sort of story
right,
really be?
yeah,
You've got to have a bit of danger. You've got to have a bit of upheaval, a bit of chaos, you know, going on. So I use my stories to get across natural law and spiritual teachings. But as a way of achieving that, there's a bit of violence and a bit of chaos and a bit of upheaval going on. Uh, you know, talking of films and movies that really speak to us, one movie making team that have really put a lot of these out are the Wachowskis. And this is a very curious thing because both the Wachowskis have since become transgendered. So you might make the argument that they're buying into certain agendas which are going on at the moment. But if you step away from them as individuals and look at the body of their work, which they've either executive produced or been responsible for writing the script for, you've got some amazing stories. So obviously they were behind The Matrix. And then you've got Cloud Atlas, which is a real favorite movie of mine. I love that movie because that goes into aspects of what I was speaking about a short while ago, these lives. We come into these lives to learn, to grow, to evolve. And in the movie Cloud Atlas, which is based on an earlier novel, you've got 6 different storylines, sorry, timelines, ranging from the late 1800s to a couple of futuristic ones, you know, a few hundred years into the future. And you have the same characters portrayed by the same actors in the movie. Tom Hanks is in it, Halle Berry, Jim Broadbent, various others. And you see them going through these different experiences in these different timelines, these different lifetimes. And depending on the way they've behaved in those lifetimes, what they've learned, what they've applied, it has a bearing on what their experience is in the next lifetime that they come into. So it's directly addressing all of this. And how many movies get into that sort of stuff? You know, this is what's so fascinating about it. And also the Wachowskis were involved in V for Vendetta, which I guess you could say is a movie for these times in terms of there being an inspiring message at the end of it. The downfall of this insidious, all-pervasive control system, which is something that so many of us want to see in our lifetimes. So, yeah, those guys, can we call them guys? I don't know what we would call them these days, have been responsible for some pretty incredible stories out there.
Yeah.
It is a challenge to have a story which fills the audience full of hope, optimism, and positivity at the end of it, but which has been thrilling and engaging along the way. I think that's a challenge that any author or scriptwriter would face. And I guess that's why we get so many movies that are violent and dreadful and full of doom, because those seem to be the most engaging stories.
Yeah. Well, and I love how there's something, and it's in the hero's journey, but I think it's also fundamental to the human story, is that the only time that humans change is when we're forced to. We're walking through the woods and it's a beautiful path and everything's happy. We're just keep walking, no big deal. But then we come to a cliff or a wall. I'm like, I gotta change direction. Only when we're forced to change do we change. And it's that idea that seems to come through. I love that the first Avengers movie, for example, you know, that they're all kind of disparate heroes in their own lives, and then this huge external threat comes from space and they have to band together. And not only that, they have to, Iron Man in particular has to potentially sacrifice his own life to save New York by taking the nuke up through the wormhole. And I don't know if you've seen the movie, but it's this idea that we can't, the resolution, the happy ending can't come until the point in the story when it seems all hope is lost. The darkest part of the story has to take place, and it has to, inherent in that moment is that the characters have to feel like it's over, they've lost, they've actually lost. And only then, when they've surrendered to that realization that they're going to lose, that's when the flip over happens. And a lot like in Lord of the Rings or in Star Wars, it's always something that's not it's not the actual character, it's not the hero doing it. It's some sort of, like in Lord of the Rings, it's like the eagles come and take out the, you know, the bad guys, and the Star Wars, it's the droids that do something. It's not the humans that do it. It's something external, which to me is the divine influence coming in, and only coming at that moment when the humans have done their best, but they can't go any further. They can't overcome this on their own, and it requires something from the outside. And I think that's potentially part of the programming that gets us to believe that we're going to have some sort of external savior, that we should just not do anything because Jesus is coming to save us, or whatever the archetype is. But I think it's inherent within that story that we have to show up, do our best, but accept that it's outside of our control what happens, and that we have to have that faith that just doing our best is what we are here to do, so that we can watch the manifestation of something divine, which then kind of, to me, galvanizes the entire human race together to realize that we're not alone.
Sure. And we can ask ourselves the question, are these filmmakers, these script writers, these authors putting these stories out because they want to inspire and uplift humanity? Why would they be doing it? So did George Lucas want to put this empowering message into millions of people through those Star Wars movies. He's talking about the Force. Like I say, I'm not a big Star Wars fan, but I'm aware that there's references to the Force, which is like this universal energy field that can be tapped into and can be utilized for good or evil, depending on the consciousness that's applied to it. So it's available for anyone or any group to use if they choose to tap into it. Did George Lucas and those that would have financed that movie have any kind of interest in conveying those deep metaphysical ideas to those audiences? Was it a cynical ploy to tap into those archetypal sort of memories that are deeply embedded within us so that the movie would be highly grossing and would just bring in loads of money for everyone involved? Or does it amount to this concept of revelation of the method, placing the truth in plain sight, which has been a big part of my work when it comes to the music industry? The controllers, through popular culture and entertainment, whether it's movies, whether it's TV shows, whether it's music, whether it's any other expression of popular culture, do like to place the truth of what's going on in the world, what they plan to do, their true nature, where they want to take things. It's been endlessly embedded into so many films. And many would make the argument that the reason we get these messages conveyed through these types of movies that we've mentioned is to fulfill that tenet, to relieve themselves of the karmic burden as they see it, the karmic debt that would otherwise come down on them if they didn't reveal to us what they're doing. As they see it, because they're occultists, they're shifting the emphasis for the harm that they wish to do to humanity away from them onto us by telling us through something like a movie, this is where we want to take society. That's why all these futuristic movies are always dreadful and dystopian, because if they have their way and we don't step in to stop it, that's the way society really is headed. So do they communicate all this stuff for that reason? And we circle back around here to the work of Stanley Kubrick. So many researchers feel that Kubrick, through his movies, was conveying the truth of this so-called elite control system that we have, the ways in which they operate, some of their occult ritualistic belief systems, which certainly came down through his final movie, Eyes Wide Shut, many great secrets revealed through that film. And a lot of sort of alternative researchers in our field feel that Kubrick was trying to genuinely assist humanity in waking up to these dreadful truths, because he moved in such circles as to have inside knowledge of these things. He knew the way this class works and some of the methods and tactics that they use and some of the goals and the agendas that they have. So when you watch movies, certainly like Eyes Wide Shut, but even Full Metal Jacket, which gave us an insight into how trauma-based mind control works in terms of the military, expressed through the military, and then also in The Shining, and in 2001 A Space Odyssey, and A Clockwork Orange, Dr. Strangelove, Lolita, which some researchers feel was exposing way back in the early 1960s, pedophile rings, so-called elite pedophile rings and child sex trafficking and all this stuff. It's been going on forever. And many people feel that Kubrick was effectively doing humanity a favor by sort of going off script. And one of the reasons why his movies are so deeply coded is because he wanted to get these ideas out, but he couldn't directly come out and make these blatant statements. So he had to cloak his movies in allegory and symbolism and code, make them very cryptic so that those with the eyes to see would get the message, but the studio bosses who financed him wouldn't be overly alerted to what he was trying to do. That's what I think makes his body of work so fascinating. And I personally feel, as do many other researchers who've looked into it, that Stanley Kubrick was taken out. So right before his final movie, Eyes Wide Shut, was released in March of 1999, he suffered a heart attack at the age of, I think he was 71. And he never lived to see that movie get released and gauge what the public response to it was. I personally feel that it was felt among his overlords that he'd taken a step too far with that final film. It was allowed to be released, but reportedly there's a whole load of footage within it which was trimmed from the final release. Nobody's ever seen that outside of the studio, so we can only wonder what was contained within those scenes. So I personally feel, in the same way that they take out certain musicians, we can give John Lennon as an example, maybe Bob Marley, Prince, Michael Jackson, Chris Cornell, Chester Bennington. In the same way that some of these individuals I feel are taken out, I think Kubrick was as well, because they'll allow you to go so far, but once you cross a certain line, then you get to know about it. And when you become a loose cannon and you start trying to go your own way and communicate your own messages, which have not been, shall we say, approved, then you become a liability and you have to be removed from the scene. That's just how I feel about it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I had heard that story about him screening the movie in its full version, and then it's like a week later he's dead, and they
Yeah.
edited out the stuff.
Studio bosses be like, "You are not putting that out, mate."
Yeah,
Oh no.
yeah, yeah. Well, I acknowledge that I might just be naive, but I've come to believe, and it stems back from my first experiences with waking up. Uh, Martin Luther King gave a speech where he's quoting Jesus, and he's talking about how we must learn to love our enemies and that love is the answer. And so that was fundamental to my journey in the beginning. And so I've held to that. And so at some point along the way, I said, how am I supposed to love this evil? How do I love this evil? And I had to figure out a way to reverse engineer from the future a scenario in my mind where these guys aren't actually evil, that they're playing the role of the bad guy to help wake us up. So they're sitting around in these think tanks like, how do we wake these people up? Like, let's do 9/11. Okay, great. Ah, shit, that didn't work. Let's do something else. You know, they just keep trying to level it up because eventually we're going to be pushed down enough that we all wake up collectively. And so I don't know if that's the case. We'll find out, I guess, but I have to believe for my own sanity that the end of the story is a happy ending, no matter how dark it might get along the way. Uh, and I feel that that is fundamental to the way that the universe is designed. That, you know, they say at the time of creation, the first angel that was created ended up being the devil, you know, Lucifer. And I think that the idea being that being was created and then realized that in order for the process to complete the way that the true creator designed it, there has to be a fall. There has to be it's a duality. So we have to go all the way to the darkest darkness in order to reach the lightest light, kind of thing. And
Exactly.
that's why I talk about the silver lining. And I want to share that message as much as possible, because people out there that I really respect are great at uncovering the darkness, but I feel like they're focusing so much on the darkness that they're not stepping back and looking at the bigger picture, that within the scope of, you know, I call it the 30,000 foot view. You step back far enough from the entire, you know, go to the God's eye perspective where the entire universe is within view. Within that universe is this dark system that's by design set up to create this transformation for us to a benevolent outcome.
Yeah. It's definitely easier to study and research and comment on conspiracy stuff, you know, dark, dreadful material. It's fairly easy to research that stuff. You know, if you're sticking to names, dates, places, times, you know, there's endless information available. If you want to piece all that together, you can come up with a history of all these occult secret societies and all these dreadful so-called Illuminati plans and all these agendas and all these schemes that they've got underway. It's quite easy to get into all that stuff. A complaint that I often hear, because I do a lot of conferences and sort of meetup type events, is that these types of events focus too much on this dark negative material. And I think the reason people have that idea is because it's more difficult to focus on solutions and how we get out of this mess that we find ourselves in. That's where the real challenges lie. It's asking more to come up with those types of solutions than it is to highlight the problems. We do live in a world of duality where you can't have one thing without the other, as you've just stated. So for good and love and truth and freedom to exist, there has to be darkness and evil to counter it, and lies and deception. If you want light, there has to be darkness. If you want up, there has to be down. If you want left, there has to be right. If you want the sun, there has to be the moon. Everything has an opposing value. And in between these two extremes of polarity, you have an absolutely endless array of different graduations. And you can come in at any point on that scale between one thing or the other. So if we take good and evil as an example, you can be, you know, the wickedest, most evil entity that's ever walked the face of the earth, or you can be someone that spends their whole life trying to stand in right action and bringing light to the world and trying to help others and doing what you know to be right. Or you can be at any point between those two. And that's something that we need in order to undergo these experiences. We have to believe that things are going to turn out in humanity's favor, in our interest. As you say, we have to believe that. If we don't believe that that's where we're headed, what is the point of any of it? What's the point of even continuing? What's the point of us doing this show? What's the point of writing books, of doing films, of starting activist groups, getting out there on the street, trying to speak to people? What's the point of any of it? We have to believe that we're going to get to where we want to be. Otherwise, we might as well shut ourselves in the garage, get a hose pipe, connect it to the exhaust, and just sit there listening to our favorite piece of music while we fade away, right? You know, literally or metaphorically. So, yes, we have to believe that the outcome is going to be in our favor, and we can manifest that. We can make that happen because we do create our own experience reality. That happens on an individual basis, and it happens on a collective basis as well. And what we've had so far is loose, disparate little pockets of individuals, people such as us, who want to turn this situation around. We recognize what's going on in the world. We stand opposed to evil and darkness. We want to shine a light on all of that. We know what living in right action is. We know what rights are. We know what freedom is. And we want to take humanity in that direction. But there's not enough of us. We need more numbers. Things are headed in the right direction, but if they continue at the rate that they have so far, it's going to take hundreds, if not thousands of years to get there. And we don't have that long because of what we're up against and how quickly they're moving, our enemies. But that's not to say it can't be achieved. We have to keep pressing ahead in whatever ways we can, and that can include putting out books, whether they're non-fiction books or whether they're novels which teach, whether they're films, TV shows, whether they're documentaries, whether it's music, whether it's art, graphics, comic books, even anything, paintings, any way of getting truthful, empowering information out there assists in this process. And what we are aiming for is that mythical, magical tipping point where there's enough of us in humanity to influence real change, where the seesaw starts to swing the other way, or the pendulum starts to swing in the other direction, whatever metaphor you want to use. That's what we're all engaged in this work for, right? Why else would we be doing it? So we have to believe that we can get there, because if we don't believe it, we can't make it happen. But if we do believe it, we can make that scenario manifest into experienced reality. That's why I do what I do. I'm pretty sure you would say that's why you do what you do as well. And I know that message is going to resonate and chime with many people watching this show. So the only thing we can do is keep on keeping on, keep on trucking, and just keep moving towards where we know we need to be.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I feel very strongly, and again, I'm an optimist and maybe I'm naive, but I feel that in this lifetime, we're going to see that tipping point we might not see the entire story play out, but I think we're going to see that place where the tide is turned. I feel very strongly that's coming in the next couple decades for our lifetime. And I think it's an exponential thing that's happening. And I think that's why it doesn't seem right now like we have enough people, enough numbers. But if you look at how many people were woken up by 9/11 versus how many people were woken up by 2020, it's a huge, huge difference in the number of people. And whatever's coming next might be the thing, who knows?
Well, one of the things that gives me some hope is that I've studied where the occult so-called elite controllers want to take society. So I know what it will look like in 50 years if they're allowed to get their way.
Yeah.
And their plans are so utterly insane, completely audacious, just madness in terms of the way they want people living. Just these 15-minute cities that we've been hearing about in the UK recently, where the idea is that within a few years, you'll be restricted to a particular zone of the city that you live in, and you won't be permitted. Imagine this, like anyone believes they've got the right to tell you where you can and can't go. That's
Yeah.
a bloody travesty in the first place.
Yeah.
But you won't be permitted under these schemes to go more than 15 minutes from where you live. And the idea is that all the products and all the services you need will be right there on your doorstep. So why would you want to? Why would you even need to? Forget traveling. Who wants to travel the world and see foreign cultures and different nations? You don't want to do that. You just want to stay in your little box apartment that you live in, being fried by 5G radiation and having all this artificial synthetic food. And just staying local and being surveilled and monitored everywhere you go, and using digital currency so every transaction can be tracked. I mean, who wouldn't want to live like that, right? I think when the reality of that type of situation really hits home to the masses, there is going to be huge resistance to it. I mean, one thing about the British, pretty sure it's the same in America too, but British people love their cars. They do. They always have. Car owners, motorists love hopping in their car whenever they feel like it, going for a spin, going wherever they want, whenever they want to do it. When restrictions start coming in and people start getting told, you can't use your car more than 100 days a year, otherwise you'll get fined. And we're tracking you, we're monitoring you, so we know when you do. You're being caught on camera everywhere that you go. That's going to be a wake-up call for many. That's where they want to take things. And when it becomes clear that that's the case, watch out for some massive resistance. A lot of people seem to find it convenient to pay for things with their smartphone. I'm stood behind them in the shop, and they just take out the phone and scan it, and they're gone. Pay for their goods, whatever it is. Nobody seems to give much thought to what would happen when cash is no longer an option, and when that's the only way that you can pay for things, and everything that you ever buy is going to be tracked and recorded. So supposing you want to buy a bottle of whiskey and you don't particularly want people to know that you enjoy drinking whiskey, that is not going to be able to be kept a secret in the future if they're allowed to get away with things. Supposing you're off for a clandestine meeting in some hotel, supposing you're a businessman who's having an affair with your secretary and you don't want your wife to find out, and you buy a box of condoms for the weekend. That purchase is going to go on your record, and when your receipt or your bill comes through at the end of the month, it's going to show up. Have a think about that. How are people going to feel about things that they might prefer others not to know about showing up? When these kind of realities really hit home to people, it's very difficult to see how these sick, diseased, psychopathic abominations are ever going to succeed with where they want to take things. Think of these futuristic films. We've all seen them, something like Blade Runner 2049, for example, Mad Max, those movies. Who really would want to live in a world like that? But that's where they want to take things. That's why they put it into all these movies. So the hope comes from the fact that when enough people realize that that's how they're going to be asked or forced to live, that's where the resistance starts. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know what sort of timescale we're talking about. Are we talking 6 months from now? Are we talking 10 years from now? Are we talking 100 years from now? I have no idea. I really hope you're right in that we get to see it in our lifetimes. It might be that the likes of us, this generation, are sowing seeds. We might be sowing seeds that are going to germinate in future generations. Maybe our children's children's children will get to live much better lives than we did because of the work that we put in while we had the opportunity to. The only important thing is that we do what we know we must. We never stray from that path, and we keep fixed on the future goals that we want to achieve. Because that's what these occultists do. That's what these sick ones do. That's why they put it in movies and music videos and stuff, because they're trying to help to manifest these situations into reality by presenting their visions of it. So we have to counter that. They're using magic, they're using sorcery. They know how to tap into the workings of the universe. They understand how energy works, how it can be manipulated, how vibrational frequencies work. And they're using that to carry out their dark agendas. Those very same dynamics are available for us who stand for truth, freedom, justice, love, light, anytime we want to put them into play. We've just got to learn how to harness them in the way that they do. We've got to gain that kind of knowledge. All of these scenarios are possibilities. They absolutely can happen if humanity collectively wants it enough. Once again, we're back to this numbers game. There's seemingly a relatively small number of us who are in possession of this knowledge and of the will and the intent and the consciousness to take things to where they need to go. Once we get to that tipping point, then it's a whole different story, as you just outlined. As we've said, the problem is we don't know if that tipping point is literally just around the corner or is 100 years away. So I guess that's part of the fun of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like, like we already talked about, I feel like you just said, if you know where it's going, it seems ridiculous. It's laughable that any human being would want to live in a reality that these people seem to be wanting to manifest. Again, that's to me evidence that they don't actually want that reality to manifest, but they know they have to project it onto us in order to help us resist it. If we don't have that resistance, then we won't take control of our own lives. We won't take personal responsibility for manifesting a positive outcome for ourselves, which is the only thing you can really do. I can't change anybody else. I can only change myself. And so I that's again why I'm so optimistic, even though, and I've studied, you know, I've been on this path for over 12 years. I've been going down rabbit hole after rabbit hole into the darkness, unafraid. Whatever I learn in there is horrifying, yes, but I'm not scared of it because I believe in a positive outcome. And I think that it's the idea of taking your light into the darkness. Your light can't be extinguished. So the darkness is only as dark as you allow it to be for yourself when you're in there examining it,
Yeah. It's overcoming fear, isn't it?
Yeah.
Fear is the key. Back to that hero's journey archetype again. It's all about the hero learning how to overcome their fears.
Yeah.
There's fear and there's love. There's two more polarities there. And there's everything that lies in between
Yeah.
those two extremes. Fear is the Key. That was the title of a novel by Alistair MacLean, who was another British military intelligence guy, just like Ian Fleming. Also the title of a movie, but how true. Fear is the key. That's how the controllers keep us all in line collectively, by using fear-based mind control, making people afraid. That's how they got away with everything they did over the past 3 years, by actually convincing the vast, overwhelming bulk of humanity that there was this deadly, I don't know if we say the word, but rampaging everywhere, and it was going to kill them unless they took certain medical procedures. I don't know how censored we are on this platform, but fear was the key there.
Yeah.
How else would they have got so many people all over the world to behave in these strange, bizarre, outlandish ways
Yeah.
that in so many cases went against their own self-interest? They were actually doing themselves and their own children harm. Just imagine
Yeah,
what it took to manipulate them into that.
it's amazing.
Into that. Well, what it took was fear, just scaring the bejesus out of them. That's how they achieve it. They employ these behavioral scientists, these master psychologists, because they know how the human psyche works, how to manipulate it, and they know that fear is always the key. So that's how they get it done. But it is complete madness where they want to take things.
Yeah,
And it's very difficult to see how they're going to get away with it, you know. And
yeah,
there's got to come a point where people just say, we can see where this is headed and we're not having it.
yeah, yeah.
Or are we all going to be in gulags in the
Right.
exercise yard, looking at each other saying, how did we get here? Oh, I didn't see this coming. Is that really what it has to come to? I don't believe it's going to have
I
to
don't
go
think
that
so.
far.
I don't think so. Are you aware of fear as an acronym? False evidence
It
appearing real.
Yeah, well, it's an acronym for many things. Ian Brown had a song called Fear in 2001. That's actually going to be a part of the soundtrack for this novel that I'm writing at the moment. Are you familiar with that song?
No.
Okay, so Ian Brown was the singer with the group the Stone Roses coming out of Manchester. They were a
Okay.
big part of the sort of acid house Manchester rave scene of the early 90s. Ian Brown is one of very, very few musicians, you may have noticed, that has stood up against the tyranny of the past 2 or 3 years. You literally can count them on one hand, those household names that have stood up to be counted and resisted. And Ian Brown is one of them. He's put out some great messages, and he's a guy who stands for truth and freedom. And as far back as 2001, he had a song called Fear, and the entire song, all the lyrics are taking FEAR and using it as an acronym and
Oh,
coming up
wow.
with different phrases.
I
So
love
it's a
that.
song that's definitely worth hunting down.
Yeah, I definitely will. Thank you. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm a big fan of acronyms like faith, first attribute, and thinking healthy, hope, heavenly optimism provided eternally. I love taking words and making acronyms out of them, or learning about other people who have done the same thing. So yeah,
Yep. That's another great literary device there.
yeah, yeah. Well, brother, I know we've probably spent more time than you have right now, so I think we should, wrap this up. But I wanted to make two comments to finish, and that's that I think you're familiar that I shared with you that I study the Mayan calendar and the astrology of the Maya, and their system uses 13 numbers, and it just goes around every day is a different number. Today is the 9 day in the process of 13. So I love that we talked about nine earlier and the divinity of nine, and I love that I feel divinely supported by have that this conversation was scheduled 3 months ago. I didn't look forward on the calendar to see that today was a 9 day. It just is. These things are not things we can plan. They're bigger than us. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Sure. This sort of thing happens to me all the time now, and I love it. I schedule shows, so I'll be going back and forth on the email with a show host or something, and they'll say, "Oh, what day can you do?" And I'll like pick a day at random, and then I realize that there's nothing random about it. It was the
Yeah.
anniversary of some major event that I speak about, or it might be the summer solstice, or there's some other significance to the date. And even just you mentioning the Mayans there, the Mayan calendar. Just yesterday, I was with a friend in Oxford, actually, who has just spent 7 weeks touring Central America.
Wow.
And, he went to Mexico and Belize, Guatemala, various other places. And we were just talking about these different cultures. And, my friend was saying the Aztecs were, quite brutal in some of their ritualistic systems, but the Mayans were a beautiful people, a beautiful culture in harmony, in tune with nature, and put some great knowledge and some great gifts into the world. And it's just so synchronistic that you should mention the Mayans today, literally the day after, and the number 13 that they base their calendar system around. These sort of synchronicities are happening literally every day to me now.
Yeah.
And it's one of the beautiful things about being alive
Yeah.
in this existence. I just love it when these things happen. It's life affirming.
Yeah.
And you never quite know what tomorrow is going to hold. What's tomorrow's synchronicity going to be? What
Yeah.
song am I going to wake up with in my head tomorrow? And how is that going to have relevance to the way my day unfolds? Uh, uh, just so fascinating, this stuff. So, yeah, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Synchronicity is for me the evidence of the divine in interweaving all of reality at all times. There's never a time when there's not synchronicity happening. Carl Jung said synchronicity is a ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see it. It's just always there, but we have to choose to pay attention to it to see it. And it's
I mean,
always
who really is going to say that these kind of things are coincidence? Really,
right.
people do try to make those claims.
Yeah.
Like, I presented all the evidence for 9/11 predictive programming, all the movies that showed what happened on September 11th, 2001, so many depictions of it. And I've actually met people who have said, oh, it's just a coincidence. You know, these filmmakers just had that idea. How were they to know that some
Right.
crazy terrorists would actually do that shit in 2001? Just a coincidence.
Right. Yeah. No, there are no coincidences.
Exactly. Exactly.
So while you were talking earlier, I'm guessing I might be wrong, but I'm guessing that your cameo in the book is the guy in the file room that doesn't have a name. Is that correct?
Yep, you called that one correctly. So I've made a reference in there to this sort of pale, skinny white guy because I was a bit skinnier in those days. And that's me. That's how I would have appeared in 1990.
Love it.
I was that guy working away with the reels of tape. This was in the era before computers. So there's a lot of period detail in that story.
Yeah.
Analog technology was still everywhere.
Yeah.
So one of my jobs was in the radio station, you used to have the jingles and the ads on these cartridges, which were little loops of tape, audio tape, inside a plastic shell. And you would record the jingle or the ad or whatever it was onto one of these cartridges. And when it had been used, you'd shove it into this magnetic device. I don't like to think what it was doing to me actually in terms of the radiation, but one of my jobs was shoving the cartridge into this magnetic field, and the field would wipe all the information off the tape so that the cartridge could be used again. And then you just put it in the rack, and the journalist or the producer would come along and pick one of these cartridges out, shove it in the machine, and record something new over the tape. And that was my job, one of my jobs, wiping these cartridges. So in the story where you have that skinny dude doing that in the production room, yes, that was me. So well spotted.
I love it. Well, I particularly love it because up until where I'm at in the story, she just noticed him a couple times, but the most recent time she noticed him, she referred to him as the guy with no name. And my website and my music and my art is all presented by a character called Name, all capital letters with an exclamation point. Name, not Patrick. Name, because
Yeah, I noticed that in your email.
yeah, and I believe that, like I said earlier, that the art is from spirit, which has no name, or we don't know the name of God or whatever you want to say. That I'm just the instrument. So I don't want people to follow me and idolize me. And so I was wrapping my mind around that early in my journey. I was like, how am I gonna create this persona? I need a persona, like a stage name, and it came to me divinely in a series of experiences that I've already written about in my website. But that was so cool to see that in your book, because the word name now, just like the numbers, is everywhere for me in so many divine ways that reinforce that I'm on my path in the right direction. So I appreciate that.
And isn't it beautiful how creativity comes through us all in different ways?
Yeah.
So you were saying to me earlier that you admired the way that I had the structure of my story in mind, and I had an idea of where it was all going to go, and you struggle with that. That's something I can do, but I can't write music for shit, and I can't sing. I've tried writing songs. I can't write songs. I'm no good at that stuff at all. So I focus on what I can do. I think I can write books pretty well. I think I can produce podcasts and radio shows pretty well. So that's what I do. And I leave songwriting and producing to other people, guys like you, who can do it so much better. you've got your gifts, I've got mine, everyone else has got theirs. There are some great artists out there. There are some great graphic designers, some great cartoonists, some great sculptors, uh, some great singers, some great guitarists. We've all got gifts to bring to the table. And when we bring them all together and we are focused on the same goal in terms of what we collectively want to achieve, we are a potentially unstoppable force. It's just beautiful how art and creativity expresses itself differently through different people, is what I'm trying to put across here.
I agree. It makes me think about what we were talking about earlier, that if we all had the same gifts, the story would be pretty boring.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, thank God there are great songwriters out there, because if you're relying on me to write a hit record, a song that deeply resonates with the human soul, you're going to have a long wait. But not to worry, because there's loads of individuals out there who do that really, really well. So leave it to
Your
them.
messages are deeply resonating with my soul, however you put them out there, brother. So, it doesn't have to be a song, right?
Exactly. So many different ways of doing it.
Yeah.
The important thing is everyone has to be doing something.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not enough. It's not enough to know. It's not enough to have all the occult secret knowledge in the world and just sit on it.
Yeah.
You've got to be doing something with it. Otherwise, how do you expect anything to change?
Yeah.
Real world action is required. We've said that manifestation is important. Using your imagination, using your will, applying your consciousness is important. But nothing gets achieved if that's not married together with real world action, physical action. So, just as a trivial example, supposing you really wanted your dream job, let's say you wanted to be a Hollywood producer, you wanted to work on movies in Hollywood. You can focus on that, bringing that situation about all you want. You can imagine it, you can try and manifest it, you can really, really want it. But unless you fill out that job application, or turn up at that studio, or go to lunch with that executive, or turn up in the reception of the company you want to work for and ask to speak to the individual concerned, if you're not doing one of those things, it's not going to happen for you. So you've got to really, really want it, but you've got to take the real world physical steps to bring it into reality. These two aspects have to be in alignment. So the reason I'm saying that is that a lot of people do seem to know a lot, but if they're not doing anything with it, nothing's going to change. They might as well not know. They might as well just be an ignorant imbecile, a regular member of society. If you know, you've got to do. If you know better, you've got to do better. Everyone can do something. Maybe you can't write a book. Not everyone can write a book, but there'll be something else you can do.
Yeah.
Even if it's down to offering backup support to those that are doing this work. So maybe you feel that you can't do any of this stuff. You don't know how to do a documentary film. You can't write a book, but there's people out there that do this and they need some support. Maybe they need some clerical, secretarial support. They need someone to go through their emails, or they need somebody to offer some technical assistance, or to file some stuff for them, or to organize some information they've got. There's always something you can do. So the message to anyone listening, to anyone in the world really, is everyone needs to be doing something. It's not enough to know and not do. And nothing is ever going to change until enough people get on board. So,
yeah, I agree. There's nothing insignificant in a divine plan. Everything, no matter how small it might seem, everything is important.
yeah, you just got to do. You got to do. You got to
Yeah.
do something. As long as everyone's doing something, then we're headed to where we need to be.
Thank you, Mark.
No worries, brother.
Appreciate you, man.
Cheers. It's a great conversation.
Yeah.
Glad we did it.
Thank you so much. I look forward to our next one. And I wish you good fortune in your multiple moves and finishing the book and all the talks you have coming up. I'm I'm one of your devoted supporters, brother. And I love seeing new content come out on your channel, and I immediately want to watch it. So thank you for what you do.
I really appreciate that. And with me, it's a case of really paying it forward because early on in my journey, there were certain individuals who inspired me. I used to read their books. I used to devour their talks, their lectures, and soak up all their information. And I can just remember early on thinking, if I could only reach a fraction of the people that these inspirations clearly have, then mine will be a life well spent. And quite clearly, I've reached many, many people. And I just stand as an example of what can happen when that process continues to be paid forward. So, for anyone who's appreciated the work that I've put out, I would ask that you simply get on the path yourself and use what you've taken from me as inspiration to be doing this yourself, inspiring others. And if every person that you inspire then steps forward and offers that gift up to others, then again, it's an unstoppable force. So I just see myself as paying it forward, standing on the shoulders of giants, you might say.
I hear you, brother. I feel it. I feel the same way. Thanks, man. Really appreciate it. Oh, maybe I lost you. Oh, there you are. It froze for a second.
Yeah, we got an hour and a half in there, so that's pretty good.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Mark. Have a wonderful day or evening, I guess, on your side of the pond.
Sure. Well, I'm glad we did it. It was a very worthwhile conversation. So thanks for some great questions and some great comments. It's a really good one. Really cool.
Awesome, brother. Thank you. Talk to
So
you soon.
when will you be putting this out?
Today.
Today. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Why wait?
I don't want to wait. I slept for the first 35 years of my life, so I'm not sleeping on anything anymore.
Well, you got there before me. I was like 37 before I started to wake up.
Right on. That's probably in your Mayan birth chart. Now, since you mentioned it, it'd be interesting to take a look at it.
It really would. Yeah, I'd like to do that.
Cool. We'll explore that.
Okay. How do
All
we
right.
do that? You need some information from me?
I'll have to look back through our emails. I feel like you already gave me your birth information because I think I sent you your Mayan birth
Oh,
information.
yeah, yeah. I think I did. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's actually a friend of mine. His name's Mark as well that does professional birth chart readings. So if you're interested, we can explore that a little bit. It's fascinating. It blew my mind. It's really great information. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Sounds good.
yeah.
So what did you used to do before you got onto this path? What's your background?
I first my family does finances, so early on I was my brother actually is a Hollywood guy. He does tape television commercials. So right after college, I spent a year in LA working as a production assistant on television commercials. Didn't like that. Went back to Maryland, where I'm from, and worked for my dad in his financial business for a couple of years, and didn't like that. And moved to Texas and met my future wife, my now future ex-wife or past ex-wife, but got into graduate school, studied psychology, got into a PhD program in neurobiology, and was doing research with post-traumatic stress with soldiers. And I was also teaching part-time. And that's when I had my waking up experience. And I left all that behind as a result, because I realized like the work that I need to do can't be done inside the box. And so, the experiences I had working with the soldiers on the military bases and the hospitals, and teaching the college students and seeing just the mess that is the university system, I don't want to participate in the harm that was being done. So I left all that behind.
You must have found Full Metal Jacket to be a very
Oh,
revealing movie.
so good. Yeah, Kubrick's
Yeah,
amazing. Just
yeah,
amazing.
really.
Yeah.
Do you know a guy named Sean McCann? Are you familiar with him?
No.
He's a podcast host. He's got a great show called Waking the Dead, and he's an absolute expert on Kubrick. He loves all Kubrick's movies. He does such skillful analysis of all all the scenes and all the messages in his movies. I've done a few shows with him. Whenever he talks about Kubrick, it's just absolutely fascinating. I can send you links to some of his shows if you'd be
Yeah,
interested.
absolutely. Please do.
Yeah.
Are you familiar
I'll
with Jay Weidner?
yeah, I know Jay Widener. Yeah,
Yeah, his work on Kubrick's pretty amazing too, especially The Shining.
exactly. It
Yeah.
really is. I'm due to go on his show soon, actually, as a
Oh,
guest.
really? Oh, badass.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
I'll send you some of Sean McCann's shows, though, because I think you'd really enjoy those.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely will check them out.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, mate. Well, great to chat to you.
Yeah, you too, Mark. Thank you. Have a great day,
Okay.
brother.
Stay in touch.
Alrighty. Peace.
Cheers. Bye.